The shotgun blast echoed through the canyon, just as Penelope Owens realized her horse had gone lame. And she was still 15 miles from Pueblo, Colorado, with night falling fast, and 3 men trailing her who wanted more than just her late husband's gold claim. She dismounted quickly, her hands trembling as she checked the mare's front left leg. Swollen. The horse had stepped wrong coming down the rocky trail, and now Penelope was stranded in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. The September sun of 1881 was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson that reminded her too much of blood. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the horse, though she knew it was useless. The mare could barely put weight on the leg. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been running for 2 days straight, ever since those men had shown up at her small cabin demanding she sign over Thomas's claim. When she'd refused, they'd made it clear they weren't asking. Thomas had been dead for 2 years now. Pneumonia had taken him during a hard winter, leaving Penelope alone with nothing but a played-out gold claim and a mortgage she could barely pay. She was 26 years old and felt like she'd lived 3 lifetimes already. The men who were chasing her thought the claim was worth something, but they were wrong. Thomas had worked himself to death for nothing but fool's gold and empty promises. She grabbed her rifle from the saddle and what supplies she could carry, leaving the rest. "I'm sorry," she told the mare, stroking her neck once before starting up the rocky slope on foot. If she could make it to higher ground, maybe she could defend herself. Maybe someone would hear the shots and come help. Maybe God would finally show her some mercy. The sun disappeared entirely as she climbed, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in what felt like minutes. Her lungs burned and her legs screamed, but she kept moving. Behind her, she could hear the men calling to each other, their voices carrying in the thin mountain air. She'd almost reached a cluster of boulders when her foot slipped on loose shale. She went down hard, and the rifle clattered away from her, bouncing down the slope. Penelope scrambled after it, but a boot came down on the barrel before she could reach it. "Well now," said a voice that made her skin crawl. "Looks like the little widow's run out of road." 3 men stood around her in the gathering darkness. She recognized them from Pueblo. Jake Morrison and his 2 brothers, drifters who'd blown into town 6 months ago and caused nothing but trouble. Jake was the worst of them, with dead eyes and a smile that never reached them. "The claim's worthless," Penelope said, hating how her voice shook. "Thomas spent 2 years working it and found nothing. You're wasting your time." "See, that's where you're wrong," Jake said, crouching down beside her. "Your late husband might not have known what he had, but I do. There's a silver vein running right through that property. Worth a fortune to the right buyer. Now you're going to sign those papers real nice, or things are going to get unpleasant." "I won't." Jake's hand shot out and grabbed her chin, his fingers digging in painfully. "You will, one way or another." The gunshot that followed didn't come from any of them. Jake jerked backward, a hole appearing in his hat as it flew off his head. All 4 of them froze. "Let her go." The voice came from above them, calm and steady. "Do it now and you might walk away from this." Penelope looked up to see a man standing on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the stars that had begun to appear. He held a rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "This ain't your business," Jake snarled, but he'd let go of Penelope and was reaching for his gun. "I'm making it my business." The lady said no. "That's the end of the discussion. There's 3 of us and one of you," one of Jake's brothers pointed out. "Then this will be over real quick." The man worked the lever on his rifle. "Your choice, boys. Walk away or get carried away." For a long moment, nobody moved. Penelope could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cold of the rocks beneath her palms. Then Jake spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he said, looking at Penelope. "Not by a long shot." "It is for tonight," the stranger said. "Start walking. And if I see you following this lady again, we won't just be talking." The Morrison brothers backed away, then disappeared into the darkness. Penelope stayed where she was, trying to catch her breath, trying to stop shaking. The stranger climbed down from the ridge with surprising speed and grace. And when he got close enough for her to see him properly in the starlight, her breath caught for a different reason. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed a cut and eyes that looked almost black in the dim light. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher, worn denim, a leather vest, scuffed boots. But it was his face that struck her. There were lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of hard years, but also a gentleness in his expression that she hadn't expected. "Are you hurt?" he asked, offering her his hand. Penelope took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His hand was calloused and warm, strong but careful. "I'm fine." "Thank you, you saved my life. Those boys will think twice before coming after you again, but you shouldn't be out here alone. Where were you headed?" "Pueblo, but my horse went lame back down the trail." He nodded, looking down the slope. "I've got a camp about a mile from here. You can rest there tonight, and in the morning I'll take you into town. Name's Prescott Owens." "Owens?" Penelope's eyes widened. "That's my name too. I'm Penelope Owens." Something flickered across his face, surprise and something else. "Well, that's a coincidence." He picked up her rifle and handed it to her. "Or maybe it's not. You related to Thomas Owens." "He was my husband. He died 2 years ago." Prescott was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was my cousin. I hadn't seen him in years, not since we were boys back in Missouri. I came out here looking for him, heard in town today that he'd passed. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." Penelope felt something crack open in her chest. Family. Thomas had rarely spoken of his family, said he'd left that life behind when he came west. But here was his cousin, appearing out of nowhere just when she needed help most. "He would have been glad to know you came looking." "Come on," Prescott said gently. "Let's get you somewhere warm." His camp was simple but well maintained. A small fire, bedroll, and supplies packed neatly beside a sturdy-looking bay gelding. Prescott built up the fire and put coffee on to boil while Penelope sat on a log and tried to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and shaky. "Here." Prescott handed her a tin cup of coffee and a piece of jerky. "It's not much, but it'll help." "Thank you." The coffee was strong and hot, and she wrapped her hands around the cup gratefully. "How did you happen to be out here?" "I was hunting, heard the shots, and came to investigate." He sat down across the fire from her, his own coffee in hand. "Want to tell me what this is really about? Those men seemed pretty determined." So Penelope told him. About Thomas's claim, about the 2 hard years since his death, about the Morrison brothers showing up and insisting there was silver on her land, about running when they wouldn't take no for an answer. Prescott listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful in the firelight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas always did have terrible luck with claims," he said finally. "We went prospecting together when we were young. He couldn't find gold if it jumped up and bit him." He paused. "But Jake Morrison's a different story. He's a vulture, only shows up where there's something to pick clean. If he says there's silver on your land, there probably is." "So what do I do?" Penelope heard the desperation in her own voice. "I can't work a mine by myself. I don't have money to hire help. And even if I did, men like the Morrisons will just keep coming. You need a partner, someone who knows mining and can help you work the claim proper, someone who can stand with you if the Morrisons come back." Prescott met her eyes across the fire. "I came out here looking for family." Looks like I found it. If you'll have me, I'd like to help. Penelope stared at him. You don't even know me. No, but your family, even if it's just by marriage. And I know what Thomas would want. He'd want someone to look after you. Prescott's voice was firm but kind. Besides, I've got experience with silver mining. Worked a claim up in Leadville for 3 years before. He trailed off, his expression going distant. Before what? Before I lost my wife. The words came out quiet. 3 years ago, there was a mine collapse. She was bringing me lunch, and she shouldn't have even been there, but I'd forgotten it that morning, and she knew I'd work right through if she didn't come. The tunnel gave way, and she was too close. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. The pain in his voice was so raw that Penelope felt it in her own chest. I'm so sorry. I haven't been able to stay in one place since. Kept moving, kept working, trying to outrun it. He looked up at her again. Maybe that's why I ended up here. Maybe I was supposed to find you, help you. Maybe that's how I start making things right. You don't owe me anything, Penelope said softly. Maybe not. But I'd like to try anyway, if you'll let me. Penelope thought about it. About going back to Pueblo alone, facing the Morrisons alone, trying to figure out what to do about the claim alone. She'd been alone for 2 years, and she was so tired of it. Tired of being scared, tired of struggling, tired of the loneliness that ate at her in the dark hours of the night. All right, she said. Partners. Prescott smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Partners. They rode into Pueblo together the next morning, Penelope sharing Prescott's horse since her mare needed time to heal. The town was bustling with activity as miners and ranchers and railway workers went about their business. Prescott took her straight to the land office, where they filed new papers making him co-owner of Thomas's claim. Then they went to the marshal. Marshal Briggs was a grizzled old lawman who'd seen everything twice. He listened to Penelope's story about the Morrisons with a grim expression. Can't arrest them without proof they threatened you, he said. But I can keep an eye on them. You two watch your backs. We will, Prescott said. And if they come after Mrs. Owens again, we'll make sure you have all the proof you need. They spent the afternoon buying supplies, tools for the mine, food, ammunition. Prescott insisted on paying for most of it. I've got savings, he said when Penelope protested. And we're going to need proper equipment if we're going to work this claim right. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting again. Penelope felt her stomach clench as they approached. She'd run from here 2 days ago, terrified and alone. Coming back felt like facing a ghost. The cabin was small and rough, just 2 rooms that Thomas had built with his own hands. It was weathered and worn, but it had kept her safe through 2 winters. The gold claim was 100 yards up the hill, marked with Thomas's name on a wooden sign. I'll sleep in the lean-to, Prescott said, nodding toward the small structure where Thomas had kept tools. Don't want to make you uncomfortable. Thank you. Penelope appreciated that more than she could say. Despite everything, Prescott was still essentially a stranger. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Penelope found herself thinking about the man sleeping in the lean-to. There was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since before Thomas died. Maybe it was knowing they were family, even distantly. Maybe it was the way he'd stood up to the Morrisons without hesitation. Or maybe it was the understanding she'd seen in his eyes when he talked about losing Sarah. He knew. He understood what it was like to have your world torn apart, to wake up every morning and remember all over again that the person you loved was gone. That shared grief created a connection she hadn't expected. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Prescott surveyed the claim carefully, mapping out the rock formations and testing samples. He was methodical and patient, and Penelope could see why he'd been successful in Leadville. When he finally identified where the silver vein ran, His face lit up with excitement. "Jake Morrison was right," he said, showing her the glittering ore in his hand. "This is rich, really rich. Thomas just never dug deep enough to find it." They started working the mine in earnest. It was hard, exhausting work. Prescott did most of the heavy digging and hauling, but Penelope helped with sorting ore, managing the sluice, and keeping the camp running. She cooked their meals, mended their clothes, and learned more about mining than she'd ever wanted to know. They talked while they worked. Prescott told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with Sarah after the war, about their dreams of striking it rich. Sarah had been a school teacher, kind and patient, with a laugh that could light up a room. He spoke about her carefully, as if the memories were precious and fragile. Penelope found herself talking about Thomas in ways she hadn't been able to before. About how they'd met in Denver, about his big dreams and bigger heart, about how hard he'd worked trying to provide for her. About the guilt she felt that she'd been relieved when he died, because watching him kill himself slowly with work and disappointment had been its own kind of torture. "That's not wrong," Prescott said gently when she admitted that. "Love isn't just one thing. You can love someone and still be relieved when their suffering ends. That doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human." "Did you feel that way about Sarah?" "No. Her death was instant. I never got the chance to say goodbye, never got to tell her one more time that I loved her." His voice was rough. "Sometimes I think that would have been easier. Sometimes I think it would have been harder. Mostly I just think about what I'd give for one more day." They were standing at the entrance to the mine shaft, covered in dust and sweat, and Penelope found herself reaching out to touch his arm. "I'm sorry you didn't get that." Prescott looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Something passed between them, something warm and tentative and frightening. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get cleaned up. It's getting dark." That night, Penelope lay awake thinking about that moment. About the look in Prescott's eyes, about the way her heart had sped up when their eyes met. It felt like betrayal. She'd loved Thomas. She still loved Thomas. Didn't she? But Thomas had been gone for 2 years, and the ache of his absence had dulled to a manageable sadness. And Prescott was here, solid and real and alive, making her feel things she'd thought were dead and buried. She didn't want to feel those things. It was too soon, too complicated, too frightening. So she pushed them down and tried to ignore them. The Morrisons struck on a cold October morning. Penelope was at the cabin preparing breakfast when she heard the horses. She grabbed her rifle and ran to the window, her heart sinking when she saw Jake and his brothers riding up the trail. Prescott emerged from the mine shaft, his own rifle in hand. He positioned himself between the cabin and the approaching men. "Thought I told you boys to stay away," he called out. "Heard you found silver," Jake said, reining in his horse. "Thought maybe we could come to an arrangement. The arrangement is you turn around and leave." "See, that's not very friendly. We're offering to buy you out, fair price for the claim, and everybody walks away happy." "It's not for sale." Jake's expression hardened. "You sure about that? Awful dangerous working a mine out here. Lots of accidents happen. Cave-ins, equipment failures, fires. Be a shame if something happened to you or the widow." Prescott's voice went cold as mountain ice. "You threatening us? Just stating facts. Mining's dangerous work. So is threatening the wrong people." Prescott raised his rifle slightly. "I'm going to count to 5. If you're still here when I'm done, I start shooting. 1. You can't shoot all 3 of us. 2. Maybe not. But I'll sure as hell get you first, Jake. You're making a mistake. 3. The Morrison brothers exchanged glances. Jake's hand moved toward his gun and Penelope's breath caught. Then one of the brothers grabbed Jake's arm. "He means it, Jake. Let's go." 4. Jake glared at Prescott with pure hatred. "This ain't over." 5. They wheeled their horses and rode off, kicking up dust. Prescott didn't lower his rifle until they were out of sight. Then he sagged slightly, and Penelope realized he'd been terrified. She ran out of the cabin to him. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, just trying not to think about what would have happened if they'd called my bluff." "Bluff? I've never shot a man in my life," Prescott admitted. "I don't know if I could have done it, even to protect us. But I'm glad they didn't make me find out." Penelope felt something warm bloom in her chest. He'd stood up to 3 armed men, knowing he might not be able to follow through because he wanted to protect her. "Thank you." "They'll be back," Prescott said grimly. "Or they'll try something else. We need help." They rode into Pueblo that afternoon and hired 2 men to help with the mine and provide extra security. Pete and Sam were brothers from New Mexico, experienced miners who'd heard about the silver strike and were looking for work. They were tough, competent, and most importantly, they could handle themselves in a fight. With 4 of them working the claim, progress went faster. They started pulling out significant amounts of silver ore, and Prescott arranged to have it processed and sold through a reputable assayer in town. Money started coming in, more than Penelope had seen in years. "We're going to be rich," Prescott said one evening, reviewing the accounts. "Really rich if this vein holds out. I can't believe it." Penelope looked at the numbers, feeling dizzy. "Thomas worked himself to death for this, and he never knew it was here." "Sometimes that's how it goes. Luck and timing." Prescott paused. "What will you do with your share?" "I don't know. I never thought I'd have money to do anything with." She laughed shakily. "Maybe fix up the cabin, buy some proper furniture, a new dress that doesn't have patches. You should have more than that. You should have a real house with glass windows and a wood floor. You should have nice things, pretty things. You deserve it." The way he said it, the way he looked at her, made Penelope's heart race. "Prescott, I'm sorry, that was forward of me." He looked away, his ears going slightly red. "I just mean you've worked hard and you should enjoy the rewards." But Penelope knew that wasn't all he'd meant. And the truth was, she didn't want it to be. Over the past 2 months, Prescott had become more than just a business partner. He was her friend, her confidant, the person she looked forward to seeing every morning. When he smiled at her, her whole day got brighter. When he was in the mine and she couldn't see him, she worried. When they sat by the fire in the evenings talking, she never wanted those moments to end. She was falling in love with him. Maybe she'd been falling for weeks and just hadn't wanted to admit it. The realization terrified her. What if he didn't feel the same? What if he was still too much in love with Sarah? What if she was betraying Thomas's memory by feeling this way? But when she lay in bed that night, it wasn't Thomas she was thinking about. It was Prescott, and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, and the gentleness in his hands despite their calluses, and the sound of his voice saying she deserved nice things. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and bitter cold. They had to stop working the mine when the temperatures dropped too low, and Pete and Sam headed into town to wait out the worst of it. That left Penelope and Prescott alone at the cabin, snowed in together. At first it was awkward. They were very aware of each other, of the intimacy of their situation. But gradually, they relaxed into it. Prescott slept in the lean-to but spent his days in the cabin, and they fell into an easy domesticity that felt natural and right. He taught her to play poker, and she taught him to make proper biscuits. They read books aloud to each other from her small collection. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. And slowly, carefully, they stopped talking about Thomas and Sarah so much and started talking about themselves. About who they were now, not just who they'd been. One evening in late November, a particularly fierce storm rolled in. The wind howled around the cabin and snow piled up against the walls. Prescott had been in the lean-to, but he came stumbling back to the main cabin covered in ice. "It's too cold out there," Penelope said immediately. "You'll freeze to death." "I'll be fine." "No, you won't. You can sleep by the fire. I'll stay in my room. It's fine." Prescott looked like he wanted to argue, but another gust of wind shook the cabin and he nodded. "Just for tonight." Penelope gave him blankets and a pillow, and he made a bed on the floor near the fireplace. She retreated to her room, but she left the door cracked open so the heat could circulate. She could hear him moving around, settling down, and the familiar sounds were comforting. She was drifting off to sleep when she heard him cry out. She bolted upright, heart pounding, and heard him again. Not a shout of pain or alarm, but a wordless sound of anguish, a nightmare. He was having a nightmare. Penelope got up and padded into the main room. Prescott was thrashing in his blankets, his face twisted in distress. "Sarah," he mumbled. "Sarah, no, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "Prescott." Penelope knelt beside him, touching his shoulder gently. "Prescott, wake up. You're dreaming." His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. Then he seemed to realize where he was and he sat up, breathing hard. "I'm sorry, did I wake you?" "It's all right. You were having a nightmare." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "It's always the same. I'm at the mine and I hear the cave in and I'm running, but I can never get there in time. I can never save her. It wasn't your fault, I know. In my head I know that, but my heart hasn't figured it out yet." He looked at her, and in the firelight his face was raw with old pain. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "I don't know," Penelope said honestly. "It's been 2 years for me, and I still have moments where I forget Thomas is gone. I'll think of something I want to tell him, or I'll cook his favorite meal out of habit and then I remember. But it's not as sharp as it used to be. It's more like an old injury that aches in bad weather." "You still love him?" The question hung in the air between them. Penelope thought about it carefully, wanting to be honest. "I'll always love him. He was a good man and we had good years together, but he's gone and I'm still here. And I've learned that my heart is bigger than I thought, that I can love what was and still be open to what might be." Something flickered in Prescott's eyes. "Penelope." "I care about you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I probably should, more than I meant to, and I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just a lonely one, but it's the truth. You're not a terrible person. You're brave and strong and kind, and you make me want to stop running." Prescott reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers. "I care about you too. I think I have for a while now. But I've been afraid to say anything, afraid it was too soon, afraid I was being disrespectful to Sarah's memory. Would she have wanted you to be alone forever? No. She told me once when we were talking about what we'd do if something happened to one of us. She made me promise I'd find someone else, find happiness again. I told her she was being morbid, but she was serious. She said life was too short and too precious to spend it grieving." His voice caught. "She was right about that. Thomas never said anything like that. But I think he would have wanted me to be happy too. He wasn't a jealous man." They sat there in the firelight, hands clasped, both of them trembling slightly. Then Prescott raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I don't want to rush this. I don't want to do anything you're not ready for, but I'd like to court you properly if you'll let me. I'd like to see where this goes." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I'd like that too." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, letting him wrap his arms around her. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, finding comfort and warmth and the first stirrings of something new and hopeful. When Penelope finally went back to her room, she felt lighter than she had in years. Like a weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. She fell asleep smiling, thinking about Prescott's arms around her and the future that might be opening up before them. The next morning was awkward in the best possible way. They kept stealing glances at each other and blushing like teenagers. Prescott made breakfast and burned the eggs because he was too distracted. Penelope spilled coffee twice. They couldn't stop smiling. "This is ridiculous," Penelope said finally, laughing. "We're acting like children." "I don't mind," Prescott said, grinning at her. "It's been a long time since I felt like this, like everything is full of possibility." The storm lasted 3 more days, trapping them in the cabin together. It should have been uncomfortable or awkward, but instead it was magical. They talked for hours, learning everything about each other. Prescott told her about his childhood, about learning to ride and shoot and work cattle, about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday. Penelope told him about growing up in Illinois, about her father who died in the war and her mother who'd followed him a year later from heartbreak, about how she'd come west looking for adventure and found Thomas instead. They played cards and read books and cooked meals together. Prescott kissed her for the first time on the second day of the storm, a sweet, tentative kiss that made Penelope's toes curl. By the third day, they were sitting close together whenever they could, holding hands, stealing kisses, learning the shape and feel of each other. "I feel guilty," Penelope admitted one evening, "for being this happy." "Don't," Prescott said firmly. "Sarah would be furious with me if she knew I was wasting time feeling guilty, and I think Thomas would feel the same about you. They loved us. They'd want us to be happy. Even with each other. Especially with each other. Because we understand. We know what it's like to lose someone, and we know how precious it is to find something good again." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm falling in love with you, Penelope. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again, but here I am. And I'm not sorry." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And I'm not sorry either." They made love that night, tender and careful, both of them nervous but certain. It wasn't like it had been with their first spouses. This was something new, something built on shared grief and hard-won joy. When Penelope fell asleep in Prescott's arms, she felt complete in a way she'd thought she'd never feel again. The storm broke the next morning, revealing a world transformed by snow. Everything was clean and white and beautiful. Pete and Sam came back from town with news that the Morrisons had been arrested for trying to rob the bank. Marshal Briggs had them locked up tight, and they'd be going to trial in the spring. "Looks like your troubles are over," Pete said, grinning. Prescott and Penelope exchanged glances. Their troubles were over, but something much better was just beginning. As winter slowly gave way to spring, they worked the mine and grew their savings and fell deeper in love. Prescott proposed on a warm April evening, presenting her with a simple gold band he'd made in town. "I know it's quick," he said. "We've only known each other 7 months, but I'm sure I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in Pueblo on a sunny May morning in 1882, with Pete and Sam as witnesses and Marshal Briggs giving Penelope away. It was a small ceremony, nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Penelope wore a new blue dress that Prescott had insisted on buying her, and Prescott wore his best suit. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Prescott kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They honeymooned in Denver, spending a week in a real hotel with hot baths and restaurant meals and a proper bed. It was the first time either of them had done anything so extravagant, and they reveled in it. They went to the theater and ate fancy dinners and spent hours just talking and being together. "I want to build you a house," Prescott said one evening. "A real house, big and sturdy with a porch and glass windows and room for a family. What do you think?" "I think that sounds wonderful," Penelope said, leaning against his shoulder. "But I want it to be ours, not just mine. Our house, our family, our life together. Our life together, Prescott repeated, like he was testing out the words. I like the sound of that. They returned to the claim in June and started making plans. The silver vein was holding strong, and they had more than enough money to build their dream home. Prescott hired a crew from Pueblo, and by September they had a beautiful 2-story house with a wide porch and big windows that let in the mountain light. They had real furniture shipped from Denver, including a brass bed and a dining table that could seat 8. Penelope planted a garden and Prescott built a barn for horses they bought. They hired Pete and Sam permanently to help with the mine, and the 4 of them worked together like a well-oiled machine. The silver kept coming, and their savings kept growing, but neither of them cared much about the money. What mattered was the life they were building together. In November, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She was terrified to tell Prescott at first, worried about all the things that could go wrong. But when she finally worked up the courage, his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears melted away. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He placed his hand carefully on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. "I'm thrilled. I'm terrified. I'm grateful." He pulled her into his arms. "Thank you for this, for everything, for giving me a reason to live again." "Thank you for saving me," Penelope said against his chest. "In every way a person can be saved." Their son was born in July of 1883, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him James Thomas Owens, honoring both their fathers. Prescott was a natural father, patient and gentle but firm when needed. Penelope watched him with James and fell even more in love with him, if that was possible. The Morrison brothers were convicted and sent to prison, and the marshal told them they wouldn't be getting out for at least 10 years. The mine continued to produce, making them wealthier than either of them had ever imagined. But the money was just a bonus. What really mattered was the family they'd created, the love they'd found, the joy they'd built from the ashes of their grief. On their 2nd anniversary, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. James was asleep in his cradle beside them, and the world was peaceful and perfect. "You ever think about them?" Penelope asked quietly. "Thomas and Sarah." "Sometimes," Prescott admitted. "Not with pain anymore, though, more like remembering old friends. They'll always be part of our story, but they're not the whole story anymore. I think they'd be happy for us. I know they would be." Prescott took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We were so lost, both of us, and somehow we found each other and we found our way home. Do you ever wish things had been different, that you'd never lost Sarah, that I'd never lost Thomas?" Prescott thought about it carefully. "I wish they hadn't died. I wish they could have lived long, happy lives. But I can't wish I'd never met you, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. So I guess what I wish is that life weren't so complicated, that we could have all of this without any of the pain that came before. That's not how life works, though. No, it's not." He squeezed her hand. "But maybe the joy is sweeter because we know how precious it is. Maybe we appreciate what we have because we know what it's like to lose everything." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun sink below the mountains. "I love you, Prescott Owens. I love you too, Penelope Owens, for the rest of my life and whatever comes after." They sat there until the stars came out, holding hands and counting their blessings. They'd both lost so much, both been broken by grief and loneliness. But they'd found each other in that brokenness, and together they'd built something beautiful. A home, a family, a love that honored the past while embracing the future. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Sarah Catherine, and 3 years after that, twin boys they called William and Henry. The house filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of a growing family. The mine continued to produce, though not as richly as before, but they'd saved and invested wisely. They would never have to worry about money again. Pete and Sam both got married and settled in Pueblo, but they stayed on to help with the mine and became like family. On Sundays, everyone would gather at the Owens house for dinner, and the table Prescott had built would be full of food and friends and children. Those were Penelope's favorite days, looking around at all the life and love that filled her home. Prescott bought land adjacent to the mine and started a small cattle ranch, fulfilling the dream he'd had since he was a boy. He taught James and the other children to ride, and Penelope would watch from the porch as her husband and children worked together, their laughter carrying on the wind. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the house was still, Prescott and Penelope would sit on their porch and talk about their lives, about how far they'd come, about all the blessings they'd been given, about how grateful they were for every single day. "I was so broken when I met you," Prescott said one night. "I thought I'd never be whole again. But you healed me, Penelope. You and this life we've built." "You healed me too," Penelope said. "I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to live again." They grew old together on their mountain, watching their children grow up and have families of their own. The mine eventually played out, but it didn't matter because they had everything they needed. They had each other, and they had the family they'd created together, and they had a love that had survived loss and grief and fear to become something strong and enduring and beautiful. When Prescott died at the age of 72, peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him, she mourned him deeply. But she didn't break. He taught her that grief and joy could coexist, that loving someone who died didn't mean you couldn't love again, that the human heart was capable of holding more than anyone imagined. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and about the Wild West they'd helped tame. And when she died, the whole town of Pueblo came to her funeral, because Penelope and Prescott Owens had become legends in their own time. Not for the silver they'd found, though people remembered that, but for the love story they'd lived. Two broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built something extraordinary. Their graves were placed side by side on the hill above the house they'd built, with a view of the mountains they'd both loved. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates and a single line, "Together again," because that was what they'd been in life and what everyone believed they would be in whatever came after. Together, complete, home at last. Their children kept the house and the land, preserving it as a testament to their parents' love and courage. And for generations, people would tell the story of Prescott and Penelope Owens, who lost everything and found each other, who turned grief into joy, and who proved that it's never too late to start over, to find love, to build a life worth living. Their story became part of the fabric of Colorado history, not because of the silver or the mine, but because of the enduring truth at its heart, that love can bloom even in the hardest ground, and that the human spirit is capable of remarkable resilience when given hope and connection, and a reason to try again. James grew up to expand the ranch, marrying a woman from Denver and having 5 children of his own. He told them stories about their grandparents, about how Prescott had saved Penelope from the Morrison brothers, about how they'd worked the mine together, about how they'd built their lives from nothing but determination and love. Sarah Catherine became a teacher like her namesake, educating children in Pueblo for 40 years. The twins became partners in a freight business, hauling goods across Colorado and making a name for themselves as honest, dependable men. All of them carried forward the lessons they'd learned from their parents. That grief doesn't have to be the end. That love is worth the risk. That family is everything. and that hard work and honesty will carry you through almost anything. The Owens name became synonymous with integrity in Pueblo, and people would say, "They're good folk, like the Owens up on the mountain." The house stood for over 100 years, weathering storms and seasons, a monument to the love that built it. Eventually, it was donated to the Colorado Historical Society and preserved as a museum, and tourists would come from all over to see where Prescott and Penelope Owens had lived and loved and raised their family. They'd walk through the rooms and look at the brass bed and the dining table and the worn but sturdy furniture, and they'd read the plaques that told the story. But the real story lived on in the descendants who carried Owens' blood, in the values they passed down, in the way they loved fiercely and worked hard and never gave up hope. That was Prescott and Penelope's true legacy, not the silver or the house or the land, but the love they'd found in the wilderness and the family they'd built from the broken pieces of their hearts. And somewhere in the mountains above Pueblo, if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, some people swear you can hear laughter on the wind, and the sound of a man and woman talking softly together, their voices full of contentment and joy. Prescott and Penelope, still together after all these years, still grateful for the second chance they'd been given, still very much in love. The Wild West could be brutal and unforgiving, but it also gave people room to start over, to reinvent themselves, to find redemption and love in the most unexpected places. And for Prescott and Penelope Owens, it had given them everything: